In theory, I am the target demographic for Volvo's brand new 2016 S60 Cross Country. You see, I do own a luxury sedan and I own a, in theory, luxury branded SUV as well. And the S60 is trying to be a compact luxury branded crossover sedan. Basically, Volvo took the same formula that they applied to the V70 and the V60 to make the XC70 and the V60 Cross Country, and they have made an S60 Cross Country out of it. We haven't really seen this sort of thing too often in the automotive world. We of course had the AMC Eagle and Subaru's attempt at a sport utility sedan, but in many ways you can actually see the BMW X4 and the Mercedes-Benz GLC and even the BMW X6 as this exact same kind of concept, except instead of squashing an SUV down to create a sport utility coupe or a sport utility sedan-like thing, Volvo just took a sedan and they jacked it up. Of course, the big change is the ride height, because what Volvo did was they took the S60 and they added about 2.5 inches to the ride height, giving this 7.9 inches. That's right around the same as you find in something like a Jeep Cherokee. We're only fractions of an inch off. Now, if your eyes are telling you that something looks wrong from these angles, I have to admit that that's also what I saw the first time I saw the S60 Cross Country, because it is fairly tall for a sedan. There really haven't been many vehicles that have attempted this. We had the Subaru Sport Utility Sedan, and then we had the AMC Eagle, and neither one of them sold all that well. However, today we have an awful lot of vehicles that fall out of the mainstream forms. We have things like that BMW X4, the Mercedes-Benz GLC Coupe, the BMW X6, and a variety of other vehicles that have this same kind of sedan or coupe-like profile, but they're trying to be an SUV. Out back, we get basically the same look as the regular S60 sedan. We have these well-integrated exhaust tips right here, although we do have Cross Country stamped across the back right below the bumper cover. Under the hood, we find one of my favorite quirky engine designs. It is a 2.5-liter inline 5-cylinder turbocharged engine. Power comes in at 250 horsepower and 266 pound-feet of torque, although this engine will overboost that torque to 295 pound-feet for 10 seconds in gears 2 through 6. This engine is mated only to a 6-speed Aisin automatic transmission and a standard Haldex all-wheel drive. The Volvo seats are extremely comfortable. However, we do not have four-way adjustable lumbar support in this generation of the Volvos. We also have a tilt-telescopic steering column with a large range of motion, but it's also manual. Now, I think that these seats are actually more comfortable than the seats you'll find in the BMW X3 or X4 or the Mercedes-Benz GLC, but it depends on your body shape, because these are not quite as adjustable as those other seats. An area where the S60 has struggled versus the competition in the regular old sedan segment is rear seat accommodation, because you'll notice this front seat is adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, and I have about 2 inches left there. You will find more room in the BMW 3 Series or the Audi A4. I also have a relatively limited amount of headroom. Now, my hair is brushing the ceiling, but my head's not touching the ceiling like you do find in certain American mid-size sedans. So these rear seats are actually a little bit more comfortable than you'll find in something like a Chrysler 200 or a Ford Fusion. This is one of the areas where the V60 Cross Country really excels over the S60 Cross Country, because you'll notice I have one bag right here and it slides right out of the trunk. And that is because for the S60 Cross Country, they give us a compact spare tire. Remember, the S60 does not get one. The S60 Cross Country, however, does, but it takes up about 4 or 5 inches of your trunk volume. The only sports on offer inside are these relatively aggressively bolstered leather seats. Now, leather is not standard on the regular S60. This S60 has the up-level Harman Kardon audio system that is standard on the S60 Cross Country. Keyless Go is also standard, so this slot right here is only used if the battery in your key dies and you need to insert it so that way the car can read it anyway. We do have this standard navigation and infotainment screen. It is relatively small for this segment because this does not get Volvo's latest system that we see in the new XC90 yet. Our model has the optional wood trim. Aluminum trim is standard. We have a lot of buttons going on here, and we'll move the shifter to drive so you can see the rest of them. The S60 uses a fairly typical console shifter. Drive is all the way down, sport is over to the left, and then you engage manual mode by clicking down for down and up for up. Over on the driver's side, we have a standard partial LCD instrument cluster, and there are a few different modes to this system, but overall the look doesn't change too heavily. The steering wheel is the same wheel that we see in a variety of different Volvo models. It has aggressive sport grips on the bottom and right up here on the top of the steering wheel, and it's a almost 3-spoke arrangement. Out on the road, the S60 Cross Country is sort of an odd duck as well, because this actually drives and handles very much like the S60 sedan. The extra ride height really doesn't have that much of an effect on the ride or the handling, and this is very, very firm. This is actually about as firm as you'll find in certain BMW M Sport models. That actually surprised me a little bit. This is not the Subaru SUS or the AMC Eagle in Volvo form. This is also not a sedan version of the XC70, because the XC70 is fairly compliant out on the road. Out here on this winding mountain road that is not exactly well paved, you can definitely feel every bump. Now on the flip side, handling is absolutely excellent, and I would actually rank this the equal of many versions of the BMW X4. Volvo's 5-cylinder engine is definitely peppy, and Volvo recently made some programming changes to this 6-speed automatic to make it shift faster, and it's definitely noticeable, especially when you put it in sport mode. The changes also mean that this engine can now produce almost 300 pound-feet of torque for about 10 seconds in its overboost mode, and it's definitely noticeable when you're going up hills, because this car doesn't have to downshift like you find in most of the 4-cylinder competition. That older engine family and the older transmission mean that we're not getting as good a fuel economy as you'll find in the BMW X4 or the Mercedes-Benz GLC Coupe. We've been averaging between 21 and 21.5 miles per gallon in mixed driving over a week with this vehicle, and that's definitely a few miles per gallon lower than the competition. Still, the acceleration numbers out of this engine are very healthy, and the S60 is actually fairly dynamic for this category. Now that is of course comparing this with the crossovers in this segment. If you compare this with the sedans in this segment, this won't feel quite as lively or quite as dynamic as all-wheel drive versions of BMW's 3 Series or the Mercedes-Benz C-Class, but they don't have the same kind of off-road ambitions that this vehicle does. Now speaking of off-road, the Haldex all-wheel drive system can only lock up and send 50% of the power to the rear wheels. This will operate very differently than more traditional all-wheel drive systems that you'd find in rear-wheel drive biased vehicles, because this doesn't use a true transfer case. We also don't have any locking differentials front or rear, so we're relying entirely on the traction control system in order to try and vector power across the axle, either front or rear. Now if the front wheel does slip, this vehicle is capable of sending nearly 90% of the power to the rear axle, but again, the brake system in this vehicle is going to be the one that's actually shifting the power around for you. Now I have had the V60 Cross Country in mild off-roading situations, and I've also had some of the new Land Rover models which use essentially the same all-wheel drive system as this as well. They feel very, very differently than a traditional 4-wheel drive system. They will eventually get you up the road, but again, they are using the brake-based traction control system and the Haldex all-wheel drive system in order to get you there. Overall, out on the road, the S60 Cross Country definitely surprised me, because this is an awful lot more like the S60 than I thought it would be. I was expecting something a little bit softer, something like a sedan version of the XC70 perhaps, or a raised up Volvo along the lines of the old AMC Eagle. That's not what we're getting here. We're getting a car that's supposed to be for that person that lives down a gravel road, wants a little bit of extra traction in the winter or in the snow, wants a little bit more snow clearance, that sort of thing, but then also wants to have a car that drives very well out on winding mountain roads. And in that respect, Volvo has done exactly what they set out to do. I'm just not entirely sure how many people are after that sort of thing, because personally I would like the extra practicality that you find in the V60 Cross Country, because it has a much bigger trunk. Pricing for the S60 Cross Country starts at $43,500, and there are almost no options available. That's because this comes almost fully loaded. Basically everything that you're seeing here is standard on the vehicle except for the wood trim that we have on the inside. That means we get the standard radar cruise control, which is excellent in the Volvo models. It is a full speed range system, will take you to a complete stop. We have the standard autonomous braking system with pedestrian detection in this vehicle. We also have standard parking sensors and a backup camera with navigation and iPod interface. Leather seating is also included in this model, and that is optional on the S60. Now when you add all of that up together, it means that the price difference between this and a comparable S60 is really only around $900 or so. BMW's X4 gives us a relatively similar look. However, it is a hatchback, and I think that if this had been converted into a hatchback, it would make the S60 a little bit more practical, because then you could use some of this extra room right here that we don't get to use in the S60. The X4 is a little bit more practical on the inside as well. We get a little bit more rear seat legroom, although it is still fairly compact back there in the rear seats. And the cargo area is of course smaller than the X3, but it is bigger than what we get here in the S60 Cross Country. Now, comparably equipped, the X4 is going to be considerably more expensive because it already starts a little bit more than this and doesn't have nearly the same kind of feature content we get in the S60 Cross Country. So this will give you relatively similar style for significantly less money. We're talking about $8,000 less. So the eternal question, sport utility sedan, is it a good idea? I am not quite sure. It does give you all the things that in theory I should want. It gives you excellent handling, it gives you the off-road ability and sure-footed all-wheel drive that I like on the gravel roads and dirt roads that I live down. However, when it comes right down to it, I think that I would buy the V60 Cross Country because it suits me a little bit better than this. You get about the same kind of fuel economy, you get a more practical rear end, you get that nice trunk in the back, and of course you don't really give up any of the styling in my mind. Of course, I am kind of a wagon fan, and I have owned Volvo wagons in the past. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section down below, and I'll see you next week.